Good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Alexander Trantin. Today, I would like to speak on the topic of bipolar principles for resolving contradictions and a matrix, a table to apply these principles. We are working together with our colleagues, Mikhail Rubin and Sergei Sisloev. Sergei is a trees professional and he is also a candidate of physics and mathematical sciences. And in this presentation, his proficiency in mathematics helped us a lot. I would like to speak about a few points in my presentation. You see them in the screen. And start by speaking about why we decided to update the Altshuler matrix. I would like a little bit to remind you about how this table, this matrix was drawn up and was formed. We will look at modern approaches to fill out this matrix and look at different options of existing matrices developed by our team. Then after that, we will also focus specifically on a few cases. These cases are not technical, they are focused on business issues. Trees is very popular when it comes to addressing business problems. We work with different companies and very often we receive requests like that, and many of the problems they send to us are business problems, and I thought that would be interesting to speak about such cases today. I work at Rusal. Rusal is one of the largest aluminium producers globally. Rusal uses trees as its permanent function. We have a directorate, a division, which is responsible for introducing trees in production processes. This way to implement trees, having trees as a permanent function rather than a consultancy approach, this means that many employees in our company at different levels use trees at different levels. They do have the basic understanding or they know how to use basic trees tools, which can be a source of some specific features or restrictions for such an introduction. Because again, it's not possible to have this quick understanding, and it's not possible to teach other people how to use trees very quickly. We have many different tools. They are very diverse. They have different domains of application, fields of application, but we need to consider that at the same time. The Altshuler matrix is one of the tools which is quite clear, obvious for almost anyone. Almost all employees understand it. They like using it, they understand how to use it, and very often they come up with very solutions based on this. So this is one of the prerequisites on why we decided to develop a relevant and upgraded and up-to-date Altshuler matrix. Because again, we've seen research developing and AI is also developing rapidly at the moment. Now today it's really very easy to implement, to introduce something new. It's really easier to verify changes, and this also stimulated us, drove us to develop this project. The second prerequisite is that, again, we have this matrix, which is outdated, and there were no revisions after 1981. Almost more than 50 years passed after the publication of the most recent matrix. When we worked on our project tasks, we faced situations when we had some pairs of parameters together with our colleagues in the working groups. We select those parameters, but then we don't find them in the matrix. There is a gap there, which also can cause questions and undermines confidence in this tool. So we thought that we need to remove these gaps to be able to make the matrix more efficient Again, also making it easier for specialists with not that big experience. Last but not least, so this prerequisite we have here, our webinars are dedicated to the development of the legacy of the ideas laid down by Henrik Saulevich Altschuler. During his time, he mentioned that almost all principles can form pairs. Those classical 40 principles are pairs, which is generation, splitting, unification. So we can use these principles and organize them in pairs. That is really possible, and maybe in your experience, you know that very well. This mono principle is not that efficient than what we might get from a combination of principles. Considering this, we understand the efficiency of such combinations, and then after that, we came up with a conclusion that maybe we should focus on more powerful principles, bipolar principles, and again, use bipolar principles instead of mono principles. A few words uh, looking back at the legacy laid down by Henrik Solovich Altschuler, and when it comes to introducing, applying digital solutions to invent something. So this first mechanical machine, Avrotron, was invented by Henrik Altschuler, which integrated Rizzo steps, and that was part of a matrix back then. And it was a prototype of a pocket AI agent that inventors could use to address tasks they had. Again, we are moving on. We are building on the ideas laid down by Altschuler, and in our work, we are actively using these computing machines. Looking at the background of the matrix, these gaps there existed from the start in the version of the table of the matrix of 1964. It had 16 by 16 cells, and over 40% in the matrix were gaps, if we don't consider diagonal cells there. In 1965, we had only four gaps, but we had more generalized parameter pairs. In 1971, the classic matrix was developed with 39 by 39 cells. But anyway, we have gaps there. We have empty fields, empty cells there, which counts for about 15%. On a regular basis, I and our project teams saw these empty fields, empty cells, which made us less confident in the tree's flexibility and created other concerns. But again, those empty fields were there for a reason. Maybe there was no contradictions. There were no contradictions that could emerge when some of the parameters crossed there. But again, our matrix and its size grew very rapidly, and it was really very hard to confirm those ways to address those typical contradictions when we introduced a typical pair of parameters or a single parameter. We needed to find to revise the whole matrix, the whole table. But at the time, they didn't have those powerful computing technologies, and that required a lot of routine, labor intensive activities, work. And after that, going forward, as you know, in 1971, there were no updates to the table because Henry Cultural decided that there could be more promising, more progressive tools to do that. They should be available. He spoke about the standards, and also Mikhail Semyonovich will speak about it today.
Once again, speaking of these lists, it requires lots of energy, and probably we cannot contradict with the fact that we have some black dots in this spreadsheet, and our team try to resolve this issue, try to eliminate this disadvantage of the table of this matrix. And I'm going to speak more about this matrix now. And matrix is visually very convenient. It's a great tool, and as Mr. Ochoa said, and we also confirm it with our experience, that matrix does not require any kind of discipline of the thought. It doesn't require algorithm, so it's not such a profound tool. And this matrix, it comprises certain elements of automatization. We just need to pick up the data. We understand what kind of parameters we have. We understand the contradictions. We need to find the recommendations which will be helpful in order to solve our task. And when we work with such great metrics, it is very convenient with the help of computers. This is what we do nowadays, actually. And the first step of our work was the augmented Alchemist matrix. And this matrix, well, this is the same classic 39 by 39. And in the course of the first stage of our work, we made some steps. First of all, we calculated the classical ratio, and for verification and in order to verify our hypothesis, we also calculated ideas for other metrics which are also used in the whole world. Step 2, we completed empty cells based on existing mathematical dependencies. And so all those combinations, all those options, we compared them. It was step 3. And based on this comparison, we opted for one or another variant, another option, and speaking more of the ratio of regularity, this is a mathematical parameter which is helpful when you work with the matrix. You show how the cells are being filled, and this ratio, when we started to work with it, we got some help from the mathematicians with some mathematics magic, and this method proved to be effective, and it is applicable. And in the course of this work, we formulated four basic mathematical hypotheses based on how these cells shall be filled in. We also had some proposals from AI, but based on our experience, we learned that the most effective way is to work together with professional trees experts and mathematicians, because as the result of such choices with mathematics regularity, we managed to obtain a pretty good result. And on these slides, you see that we filled in and we verified different metrics, and the augmented matrix show us a very good correlation with a classic matrix with a whole Archulus matrix. And this means that our idea that we can fill in all these cells based on mathematics algorithm, this hypothesis can be true. Moreover, I would like to add that there was additional verification of the classic existing matrix, and we chose just a random matrix. As you see, the regularity ratio is less than 1.10, and we found some matrix with a very similar effects in terms of the filling of the cells. Some more math. I'm going to be boring for you for some more time. We were also into knowing of this matrix. And as you know, Alcala in this cells has different approaches, one, two, three, etc. And it can influence on the way how it is filled. That is why we base on the normalization logics of the matrix. So if we increase the number of the parameters, then the ratio of the matrix is increasing as well, and the ratio shall go down in the country if the number of the characteristic is less, and the number of techniques per cell. So this is what is written on the table in the screen. And our initial logic was proved that this is what can be used. Mathematics can be used when you work with the Alcalus matrix. And as I told you before, we shall have some opportunities to test this matrix, and probably you know that there is a specific software and it is called as Campinatrix, and this augmented matrix, Alcalus matrix is there, and if you have such a wish, you can test it to see whether it works, whether it helps you to tackle your own tasks. In our company, Rusal, we use it, and it does not provoke any questions among our colleagues. Now, very short conclusions at the end of step one. Mathematical pattern works, and of course, here we see that the combination of a mathematician and aspect works better. And generally speaking, the regularity ratio helps to compare how the metrics are being used, and so that you can see, you can verify whether these approaches works or whether they do not work. Anyway, you remember initial request was just to reduce some tension, but as Alcala said in 1885, 40 principles that were just history, and we work with standards. And based on his idea that, generally speaking, we have some approaches which follow standards or evolution lines. We came up to such an idea that all these three tools can be unified, that we shall take into consideration the logic, some standards, as well as classical examples, and as the result, we see the updated tool which our team calls as the bipolar principles. Now let us move on and speak more about this topic. Let me continue with the history. This is the confirmation of my idea. Still, Alcala said that we could work with different approaches, and there were also some ideas from Flickstein in 1973. There were also physical contradictions when we work. They show their dual nature, their dual requirements, their property, their attributes and anti-attributes. And to summarize, we can draw such a conclusion that bipolar approaches, or just basically the whole logic, was founded and was laid by Archula. And with our team, we try to follow this logic. And as the result, taking into consideration the standards, different evolution lines, different approaches, we managed to have 18 bipolar principles. You see them on the screen as well as their names, and you see how it looks like. For example, 2 out 2, it includes principles 19, 20, and 41. 41, they are additional 10 principles, which initially we did not include in the classical work when we worked with Ultilis matrix. Now, let us have a look at one of the example, 204. It includes classical principles 15, 14, 18, and 21. Then we gave it a name, dynamization, and we prepared a description. It's not just a composition of different texts from other principles. No, this is a professional text. It does not include only the logics of money principle. It also includes the evolution lines, the lines of dynamization, as well as standards which are tightly connected to that. So this is also a unique piece of information, unique text, which helps to be able to fill and to use this bipolar principle. And it was all done by computer. And you see what we did with the matrix. In classical matrix, I had 21, 35, 39. Then in the updated version with the bipolar principles, we did as follows. If 204 is a part of 21, that means that to this cell we include 204. If 35 is a part of 206, then we include it into this cell, and so on and so forth. This was the logic, how we incorporated Ultraless matrix, and we also added their bipolar principles. I'm not going to speak of technical tasks here, and we are going to move on to the topic such as bipolar matrix for business. Now, why is it different from bipolar principles for techniques? If there are 39 classical characteristics, then in the matrix of bipolar principles for business, we had 40. Instead of 18, we have 15 bipolar principles. Also, to work with this matrix, we updated 5 principles of contradictions. Now, why do we have 40 principles? We decided that many classical descriptions for the matrix, they do not totally follow the business logic. Yes, of course we can speak of temperature, the different colors of business, etc. But we decided not to play black magic, not to live with our fantasies, but we just excluded these parameters from the matrix, and on the contrary, we added some principles which follow the business of any company. What do I mean here? If we speak of business tasks, first of all, we speak of different companies. And in a company, there are standard processes related to, for example, developing of a product with some resources, with the sales and distribution. The company is related to the market. We can speak of customer loyalty, etc. They are characteristics about the business and business model. They are included in the matrix of bipolar principles. So with the principles, it's actually the same. Out of 18, we added not everyone because they are not suitable for business environments and they follow the same logic. Something which has just technical application, we just excluded it so that not to work with, I don't know, with the fantasies by solving this task. Now, what are the characteristics? As I told you, we kept the basic one, but we adapted them to business and we added some more. For example, the revenues of the clients, exchange of information, etc. And we also take into consideration the experience of tree society, how we shall work with matrix. And it includes the knowledge, the experience in the trace world. And now you see these 15 principles. So we also updated and adapted them to business so that in the most simple and effective way, people could take them and use them. I don't know, something typical for business like pressure. Probably for people, it's difficult to use this approach and to adapt them to business realities. That is why we see such titles as unification or uniformity, uniqueness, etc. And some of the principles they got renamed so that the users wouldn't have any particular difficulties when they use this tool. And there are 5 methods for business, and beyond the classic ones as time and space, we have additional methods for business. And this is the systemic transition through structures and systemic transition through action. It is also a very long work because they are very similar. However, their nature differs. I might have the same methods, which could be relevant to both of them, but there are some differences. And if I speak about the change of consequences in the operation, this is not the same when we speak of the changes in the operation itself. We might have the same objects, however, we work with the structure itself when we say when we do something inside of the operation, or if we speak of the consequence, the approach is different. And method 5 is situational variability. It resembles to the technical one. However, it is extended because the life and business is more complex. It includes economics, it includes politics. So that is why it is dedicated to situational variability. And now let us have a look at the actual realization of this project. And before I move on to the cases, Rusal is quite a big company, and it also includes not only different structures, not only legal entities, other companies from many countries, from many cultures, and it also means that business processes in our company take place in different angles of the world, as they can be implemented differently. That means that we might have different infrastructure, we might have different internal structure, we might have our own documents, or our subsidiaries might have their own legal documents. And what we have in our headquarters, that doesn't mean that other divisions or other legal entities have them. They don't even know probably what we do in the headquarters. That is why some of the cases they could not exist if I only worked with the headquarter, but we interact with the whole structure. So case 1, it is related to the initial situation, we needed to organize the process of informing about changes in business processes and the conditions of a large number of outsourced processes and the branch structure of medial centers. So, as you see, here in this description, it's not everything clear, and it's convenient that now in trees we have artificial intelligence, and it's very easy. We can have a dialogue and we can work with the tasks which we have, and with the help of these dialects we can not only get a problem or get a task, we can have a real situation. And you see that after clarification the text was extended, and in the dialogue together with the colleagues we specify these tasks, and upon clarification with the help of AI we wrote the contradictions, and it seemed to be obvious for us. However, let me once again tell you that resources are different, financial resources, technical resources as well. That is why not always obvious solutions can be seen and can work out wherever you want. And we pick up some contradictions which we could deal with, and we used bipolar principles for business. Currently, in trees, we have automatic parameters or pairs of parameters, what you would like to have, and these parameters can be chosen, and we decided that we have some specific characteristics, and upon this work we have several bipolar principles. This might be action or anti-action, hierarchy, and systemic levels. In the end, it is very convenient that bipolar methods, they are quite big, and on the one hand, it is bad because it seems to us that we have to deal with more information. On the other hand, it means that the current opportunities in terms of the AI utilization helps to be efficient and to go through big volumes of information and big tasks. And in the end, beyond a very short solution, we can have a program for action or action plan which can be implemented and which can help us to solve the initial task. And again, based on bipolar principles, we had specific action plans. Like here, the system recommended to us to create a center for changes, but not all the tasks here we could use because there are some technical difficulties. However, there was such a system which gives to the employee some authorities, to the curator. He or she receives an email about the changes in the specific rule of interaction, and then the curator very quickly communicates this information to the outsourced specialist. So no chaos here in terms of notification. When people would be notified later than needed, that means that here we have preliminary interaction with the outsourced people and we train them to new changes. And it also decreased certain tension, and this solution was effective. Case 2, It is connected to the low staffing level of internal resource. It was quite a painful issue for us. The nature of this issue is that for some positions, quite high positions, very often we do not have the right person who can take this position. And in accordance with our internal documentations, we have certain requirements to employees. So our employee has to correspond to specific requirements and needs. And if there is something or just one item in terms of which the person does not suit this place, that means that the person cannot be appointed. And this shaky market, which we have now, when a person might leave the company and we don't have anybody who could substitute him or her, and this vacancy, in accordance with the internal documents, shall we resolve the situation with the external person, which can be found somewhere on the market, and this vacancy can remain open for long periods of time. And that means that there are some pressure and stress for other people in the company who have to cover these mentions for a period of time. And as we see here, initially and after clarification, the text is quite the same. That means that I had an experienced colleague here, and she knows how to deal with trees, and she understands well how to solve the tasks. The logic says the same. We have an initial problem, we need to clarify the situation, then we need to create a list of contradictions to the requirements, we pick them up, we prepare everything. Same here. If we wish, we can use some tips, combinatorics application for some parameters for the further application of principles. And in this particular task, we had three additional fields. And this is the constant action, self-service, etc. And we thought that it might be useful for us to take this information into account, and it's very convenient that the system, with the help of the prompts which we added to the software, plus bipolar principles, they created not just a response, but the whole program. It also might prepare some analytics. And we analyzed a long text, and we decided that such an obvious and a simple solution to create a pool of 2 or 3 people who could take this position, this is what works well. And 2 or 3 people, this is what just the top management had. For now, we have the same practice for the key positions for lower levels. 2 or 3 people, they are all ready, they train, they improve their skills of all the time. And with that, the probability that in the case of the employee decides to leave the company, somebody out of 2 or out of 3 potential people could suit this position. Moreover, another solution, and this is the solution, which means that we need to work more efficiently and to place more efforts when we work with talents. Starting from the last year, we had the opportunity in the company of self-promotion so that you can get into the personal reserve. That means if you have enough motivation, you can go to this reserve, and as a result, you can not only occupy the position of your manager or your head, your boss, potentially this person even can cover the position another division, and the system protects itself so that there are not going to be any problems further on. And the final case, I know I have only 15 minutes.
Oh, this is also relevant, related to recruiting of the personnel, and this relates to the companies which is within our framework. The initial problem was the following. So this task, this problem, we had it some time before, not in 2025. Our IT department sends an HR request for recruitment. Our HR department select, recruit, make some suggestions, and then after that, our IT specialists then receive applications of employees not having relevant skills, not willing to relocate, not willing to move, or having different salary expectations which cannot be met by the company. So, in all this boils down to our IT department recruits personnel because, but this is not their function, their core function. We have an HR department responsible for that. With that, we had this conflict. Again, the logic was the same. We clarified the situation through dialogue. We formed the contradiction. We selected the contradiction to work with. And then after that, we worked with the matrix, with the bipolar principles matrix. So we selected generalized parameters, and then after that, the system recommended that we address our task, our problem, through bipolar principles with the copy work and increasing flexibility. Using the same approach, we create a program for which actions we can take to avoid such a situation, to mitigate the situation. We work with the colleagues, we sat with the colleagues and try to formulate those possible approaches, those possible way outs. We suggested developing an SLA, a standard for interaction and for providing this service, connecting the IT department and the HR division, which was the responsible function. The the solution was really simple because, well, they didn't return to me to with this address for this task anymore. So this means that this suggestion with SLA worked well to address the problem. In conclusion, to conclude, so I'd like to mention that we started this work in 2024. So we formed our bipolar matrix back in 2024, and we then worked further with the matrix in 2025. We applied the matrix for addressing different problems at Rusal and at other companies, friendly companies. So we already have had this track record, these practices. Of course, maybe this experience is not yet sufficient. Maybe we could further adjust our principles, our approaches, but we understand that in 2026 we have even more ways to consider our existing business models, to take them into account, considering the fact that AI has been developing, has been leapfrogging. Even like 18 months ago, we couldn't think of implementing something which we think is can be easily implemented today. We are planning to focus on more specific uh, tailoring of the matrix to users, considering those elements on working with business models. If a user has a problem, for example, with the assortment, for example, the assortment being a part, an element of a business model, in such a case, the metrics with this contradiction, overcoming contradictions in assortment, so this should be something that is suggested in a unique way and related to assortment. So this is the approach we have. So we want it to be implemented through these specialized updated formulations, forms for a specific business model. My last slide. So we think that the work, the progress points out the potential to develop trees principles laid down by Henrik Altschuler. And of course, at school, then we have these different disciplines coming together, AI, mathematics, and other disciplines to address this problem and also expertise of trees professionals. And of course, this is of course relevant for trees in the 21st century. The Trees Developer Summit is a promoter of trees in the 21st century, as you're aware. This can be a flexible version which is adapted, tailored to our current time, current needs. So you can use this matrix free of charge in the Campino Tree software suite. We are planning further to test further versions of the matrix going forward. We also plan to integrate our principles with other AI models. And of course, it would be good to have your inputs. Maybe you could test our solutions, and we would be happy to get some feedback from your side. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention and happy to take your questions. Thanks.
Спасибо, Александр.
Thank you,
Вот у нас
Alexander.
осталось еще
We
9 минут.
have 9 minutes.
Здесь есть различные вопросы.
We have
Вот один из
some
вопросов
questions in the
касается
chat. One of
условия
the questions that
ответа.
remained unanswered.
Это вопрос или утверждение от
A
Литвина.
question or a comment from
Сейчас я его найду.
Mr. Litvin. I'd like to find it here.
Миша, я не задавал вопросов.
Нет, это не от тебя было.
Well, Mikhail, I didn't ask
Спасибо.
the question.
Да.
I haven't asked it.
Значит,
Maybe I can also have a look
просто идет перемешка
on the
вопросов и
chat.
к Виктору, и к Александру.
There are also questions both to Victor and Alexander. We see Dmitry Bakhturin raise his hand.
Пожалуйста.
Бахтурин, где у нас? Пожалуйста.
Dmitry Bakhturin, yes.
Спасибо. Меня подключил
Over to you,
коллега голосом. Хочу задать вопрос. Спасибо за доклад.
colleagues.
У меня
Thank you
вопрос к его
for
первой
the
части.
presentation. I have a question for the first part,
Гипотезе,
the assumption
заложена вот в трансформацию
which you
классической
have
матрицы
as
Альтшулера,
a
основанной
basis
на
for the
анализе
classic Altschuler matrix,
процентов технических решений и так далее.
which is based on
Скажите, а не
technical
рассматривалась ли
patterns
такая
and
версия
designs?
вот этих
So
пустых
didn't
мест
you
в
look at
классической
those
матрице?
empty
Там
gaps in a
просто
classic
нет
matrix? Maybe
противоречий между
there
этими
were no
параметрами.
contradictions
Что это не Альтшулер не
within these
доработал,
parameters. Maybe it
доработал,
was not
или там
Altschuler's
там
mishap,
в
or
70-е годы не было, а
maybe
потом
in the
появились.
1970s there weren't any
Возможно, это
contradictions, but they
пустое
appeared
между
later
техникой,
because again this
что между
technical
отдельными
domain
параметрами противоречия
works in
возникают,
such a way when
ну,
we
просто в
might have
силу их физической природы.
contradictions
А между другими
between
нет
some
возникает.
parameters while others might
И,
not have them.
соответственно, тогда сама
And with that,
идея
the idea
запомнить,
of
неважно, там, математической статистикой,
memorizing
ну, какими-то
that one
далекими,
with
как бы сказать,
mathematics or
манипуляциями
with statistics or with
математического
some
толка, ну, она
uh,
просто в принципе в
ways or
своем
some
лишь
tools based on
опирается ровно
mathematics to do
потому,
that.
что...
Maybe
Можно я отвечу?
it is not
Да, можно
underpinned by
кто-то
anything.
ответить, или
I can
кто-то.
take that,
Дмитрий не разрешил.
or Alexander. Yes,
Значит, миссия прекращена.
we are
Миссия
one team, so
прекращена.
anyone
Просто
can
мы
take your question.
сделали
So we started from this, actually.
картотеку
We
задач,
created a list of
которые попадают именно
problems
на пустые места.
which relate
В
to those
частности,
empty spaces, empty
Олег
fields.
Клаев этим
Oleg
занимался,
Kryev was the one
тестировал.
to
Еще
be
наши
part of
коллеги
the
из
testing.
Красноярска.
We also had our
И
colleagues from
да, значит, мы
Krasnoyarsk working on
такие
it.
задачи находили.
So we
Они попадали в пустые
found these
места.
such
И
problems.
потом мы
Then we put them
перепроверяли
to
все
the
те
empty spaces, and
рекомендации,
then after that
которые
we
мы
checked that once
проводим на
again. So
этих
those recommendations
заполненных уже
we
этих.
provided for the
Поскольку они
filled out
подходят
or the filled cells, we
эти
looked
задачи.
at whether they
То есть
are
такое
relevant
тестирование,
for these
оно
problems. So we
было.
performed this testing,
И я думаю, что должно продолжаться. То есть
and I
сегодня
believe
можно
that we
сказать,
should
это
continue doing that.
повека на 2-3 десятков
Again,
задать
using that
достаточно.
to verify
То есть
this
я хотел
for
сказать,
using
я
10 or
просто не
20
помню.
problems.
Вот у Альтшулера был
Sorry,
пустой
excuse me,
мир,
but again, Altshuler had an
он
empty
в
field.
своих
He
поисках
had two
не нашел
parameters, but then
Да.
и не
with his
сформулировал, и не
work,
мог.
through his
А
activities,
вы
he was not
откуда
able
брали
to
эти
formulate
пустые
a
места?
principle. But where
Это
did you
это
find,
проблема.
from which
Не,
did
еще
you
раз. То есть я же про
get
это
your
и спрашиваю.
principles? That was a
Вы
presentation. The
математически,
presentation was about
статистически,
it.
там, и тра-та-та,
Mathematically,
как-то
statistically, you have
аппроксимировали друг
mentioned that. So you
другу эти пустые
approximated
места.
the
Да.
principles for
Значит,
these
было
empty
два
fields.
вопроса.
Yes,
Один вопрос.
that's
Существует
correct.
ли противоречие в пустых местах?
Is
Ответ
there a
да. Мы
contradiction in the empty
проанализировали
fields?
там
So the
пару
answer is
десятков
we
задач и
analyzed
находили конкретно
dozens
вот
of
эти задачи, они
problems and we
попадают в
found
пустые
those
места.
problems that
Никакие противоречия
could
не
be
видим. То есть
f-
это
could
первое.
fill those empty
Вторая
fields. And this
часть
means we have
вопроса,
these
да, была
contradictions.
связана,
There are
как
contradictions
вы
like that. The
находили
second part of your question was on how we
Не, ну это уже
found
как бы
them.
неинтересно. На это можно
Well,
не
no,
дальше
that's
задавать.
maybe that is not quite relevant. Thank you.
Ну да, в подтверждение я же и сказал, мы
Yes, just to
сталкивались с
confirm,
ситуациями, когда
I
мы
mentioned
с
that we
командой
faced a number of
находили
situations
противоречия
with the
и
team when
закрывали
we
пустые ячейки.
were looking for
Александр,
contradictions
значит,
and
по
found empty cells.
матрицу Романа спрашивали. Валерия Сушко как раз и спрашивал.
Valerie asked about the
Значит,
matrix,
смотрели мы ее, не смотрели, учитывали, не
Davlo-Roman matrix, whether
Да, конечно,
we
учитывали
considered this
матрицу
matrix.
Романа, да, безусловно.
Yes, the Darrell-Mann
А
matrix,
касаемо
we used it,
эффективности,
indeed.
ну тут нужно, наверное,
When it
сделать
comes to
более широкий
performance,
перечень,
maybe we
но с
could
точки
do like a
зрения
wider sampling here
соответствия тем математическим способам верификации, о которых я упоминал,
based on the
матрицу
mathematical
Даррелл-Мана
verification
всегда
methods. The Darrell-Mann matrix
хорошим способом.
was a good
Спасибо.
tool,
Он сейчас
and I
как
can
раз
confirm it.
четвертую матрицу
Yes,
разрабатывает.
he is working
Там есть
on
еще
the
матрица,
fourth matrix.
есть
He
еще
has
матрица Дэвида Конли. Кстати,
there is
вот
a
интересно, что
David Connolly
матрицу Даррелла Мана
matrix.
используют компании,
Darrell-Mann
которые
matrix
производят какой-то
is used
контент.
by companies
А вот те
generating
компании,
content.
которые
Those companies
перепродают,
which
они очень эффективно
resell
используют матрицу
content,
Дэвида
they
Конли.
efficiently use
Конли
David Conley
возглавлял
matrix.
аналитический отдел на
Conley
Intel.
led the
Он
trees
ушел
department
сейчас.
at
Прошу
Intel.
прощения, Валер. Александр, у нас есть
Valerie,
эта
sorry,
матрица
Alexander, do we have
Конли
this Conley
или
matrix? I don't remember
Мы
it.
ее
No,
не
we
проверяли.
Да,
haven't
Валерий,
checked it.
мы не
Очень
We
хорошая
haven't
матрица,
checked it out.
серьезно.
Вот если
It's a good one.
поделитесь, то
Я потом
Maybe if you can
пришлю.
share it,
Хорошо.
да, мы
share
Спасибо.
this matrix with
да,
us, it would be
мы
good. Yes, I will
с
send it to you.
рассмотрим другие
Yes, we
варианты.
would be
И
happy
я бы
to
дополнил
refer
еще,
to it, and
Александр,
with that, I also
что
would like to
мы
add
внимательно смотрели
that we
и на те характеристики
attentively
в
looked at those
матрице Мана,
characteristics in
и
the
на те методы, которые он
man
использует.
matrix and the
Там часто
principles he
используется
used.
как бы калька
Some
у
of them
Альтшулера,
Да.
часть
copy
калька
what
является
Altshuler had,
другие, которые
and after that,
он уже предложил.
there is something else suggested by him,
Можно
added by
задать
Conley.
общий вопрос по
I
этой
have
теме?
a general question.
Ну, конечно,
Да.
Yes, Simon.
Вопрос такой. Дело в том, что матрица или таблица Альшулера, она
Altshuler
направлена
matrix
на разрешение противоречий
works with
технических. А в
technical
свое время мы
problems.
же, весь наш семинар посвящен развитию идеи
Our
Альшулера.
our
Альшулер
webinar
прямо
actually
сказал, что
is
после
dedicated to the
применения
development of
противоречивых
Altshuler's
физических,
ideas.
которые сидят глубже, чем
Altshuler mentioned
технические,
when we have physical
уже
contradictions which are
не
deeper
очень
than
имеет
technical
смысл
ones,
говорить о
maybe there is
разрешении
no point
противоречий
in
технических.
overcoming,
Зависит,
in
это
addressing technical
прослеживается, что именно
contradictions. We have it
физически
in
больше разрешено.
REs
То есть сами
when we have
приемы,
technical
они
level and
прикладные к
then go
разрешению
down to the
противоречий
physical
физических.
level. So maybe
Почему
this is
все равно
something we can use for
вот
addressing
такие
physical
гигантские
contradictions.
усилия
So these
на
events, efforts
дальнейшую разработку
are taken
матрицы,
to
которая
develop the matrix moving
направлена на
forward
разрешение
to
противоречий
make it
технических.
progress, which is
Ну,
there
значит,
to address technical
во-первых, я думаю,
contradictions.
что
Why is
для
that?
многих
Well, first of
будет
all,
открытием то, что
again,
разрешая
it
технические
won't be a
противоречия
discovery to
так
tell you
же, как мы
that
разрешаем
when
физические.
we address
Между
a
физическими
technical
противоречиями и
problem, a
техническими
technical
таится
contradiction, we also address a
логические
physical
связи,
contradiction because there are logical ties, links between the
взаимодействия.
two. Those are
И
the links
поэтому
of
эти цепочки можно
interaction between them, and it's possible to develop these
на уровне
chains
физики, химии
at different
и
levels,
на
at the
уровне
chemical level, at the physical
физической
level,
памяти,
and
углубляясь
at
в
just
физику.
generally technical level
А,
without diving deep into the physics
Значит,
level.
температура, давление,
Temperature,
и так далее.
pressure,
Какая
and
характеристика?
other characteristics.
Техническая или физическая? То есть
Are they
таблица Альтшулера, она содержит
technical or
самое
physical
и то,
characteristics?
и другое.
Altshuler's table,
Или я
Altshuler's
говорю о
matrix
параметрах, Миша,
integrate
о
both. I am not referring
именно
to
понятии
parameters, I'm
технического
referring to
противоречия, когда
the
улучшение одного
technical
параметра приводит к
contradiction
ухудшению другого.
concept when
практически
there are two
как
parameters
то есть
impacting each other.
давление,
There can be
Вы
physical
формулируете физическое
parameters, pressure,
противоречие
and others,
острое.
but the
да,
physical
Да. В
contradiction
этом
is not formed.
эвристичность новая
This is
появилась.
the first
да, да,
heuristics we have here,
да.
which is
Прощай, матрица,
emerging.
здравствуй, матрица.
Again, we say goodbye to the matrix and we say hello to the matrix once again. Well, this is how it works, because
Да. Но я
the whole
хотел,
world
раз
uses a matrix.
Саймон напомнил про идею Альтшулера по этому
So
направлению, я
Altshuler's idea
напомню
about this,
о том, что
or I'd like to remind
Альтшулер
you
говорил о
that
том, что вообще надо
Altshuler mentioned
отказываться от
that we need
матрицы,
to
и
stop
что
using the
значит,
matrix, to reject the matrix
Аризе, прошу прощения,
altogether.
сейчас
In
перебиваю,
Ari's,
он уже не
this
ссылается на матрицы, на приемы.
Да?
matrix
Совершенно верно,
is
да.
not referred to, they don't
В
refer
этом
to the
направлении я
matrix,
боялся испугать, но,
and
видимо,
I was
народ уже подготовленный.
afraid
У нас есть
that I would
работы, где мы показываем, что матрица вообще не нужна.
scare you,
Но
but
это не
we
будет
do have some
разговор
examples
в этот раз.
Ну
where we
вот,
show
собственно, я
that
про
we
это
don't need
спрашиваю.
the
Спасибо.
matrix
Ну, про это
whatsoever.
все и говорят, да.
I am
С
asking right about
80-х,
this one.
по 130
Everyone is
годов
talking
прошлого
about it
века.
starting
Но мы
1970s
покажем, как это можно
of the
сделать.
previous century. Well, we
И
will
тем не
show how
менее,
it can be done,
матрица
but
здесь.
anyway, the
Да,
matrix
да,
is
и
still here
много.
with us.
Да.
Yes, and this
Эволюция
is
флогистона
why
тоже
we
до
are
сих пор
having
существует, и
this
некоторые люди ей
presentation.
пользуются, да,
Phlogiston
так что...
Кое-какие
is
вещи не
also
умирают.
still here. We see that
Я прошу
some
прощения.
things
Если есть кто
are there to
заинтересован в
stay.
том,